What if Jonathan Joestar, the legendary gentleman of the Joestar family, suddenly found himself in the world of Demon Slayer? After being thrown into the Taisho-era mountains, Jonathan encounters Tanjiro and Nezuko and discovers a new kind of enemy, demons. But the demons are about to learn something terrifying. Hamon, the Ripple, carries the power of the sun. When Giyu Tomioka arrives and witnesses Jonathan destroy a demon without even using a Nichirin blade, he begins to question everything he knows about fighting demons. Can Jonathan's Ripple change the fate of the Demon Slayer Corps? So sit tight, get comfortable, and let's get into the story. And if you enjoy these crossover adventures, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. The air in the Taisho Mountains didn't taste of salt and burning wood like the deck of a dying ship. It tasted of pine, ancient frost, and the iron-thick scent of fresh slaughter. Jonathan Joestar collapsed into the drifts, his lungs screaming. The last thing he remembered was the warmth of Dio's severed head in his arms, the tragic, twisted brotherhood of their shared end. But the explosion hadn't brought the cold embrace of the Atlantic. Instead, the world had folded, screaming in a kaleidoscope of gold and shadow, and spat him out into a silent, white purgatory. His clothes, the fine, shredded remnants of a gentleman's attire, were useless against the biting wind. His throat was raw, his Hamon-stoked blood the only thing keeping his heart from seizing in his chest. As he pushed himself up, his hands sank into the snow, and he felt it. Not the rhythmic pulse of life, but a jagged, discordant vibration. It was the same evil he had felt in the stone mask, but concentrated, sharper, hungrier. A scream shattered the silence. It wasn't the roar of a zombie or the cry of a soldier. It was the high, thin wail of a child. Jonathan didn't think. He didn't check his wounds or the pluck sword still strapped to his side. He ran. His boots crunched through the crust of the snow, his breathing shifting instinctively into the rhythmic, controlled cadence of the ripple. Each breath pulled the freezing air into his lungs, sparking a golden glow beneath his skin that flickered like a dying candle. He rounded a jagged rock face and stopped. The scene was a dark satire of a family portrait. A young boy in a checkered haori was pinned to a tree by something that looked human, but moved like a predatory insect. The creature had pale, sickly skin, and eyes that burned with a manic purple light. It didn't want to kill the boy, not yet. It was savoring the terror, its elongated fingernails tracing a line across the boy's throat. "Please," the boy gasped, his hands trembling as he held a broken hatchet. "Nezuko, run!" the creature laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering on a grave. "Run where, little meal? To the bottom of my stomach?" "Unhand him!" The voice was a thunderclap. The demon turned, its neck snapping with an audible crack to look at the giant who had emerged from the tree line. Jonathan Joestar stood 6'5", a wall of muscle and righteous fury, his blue eyes burning with a light the demon didn't recognize. "Another one?" the demon hissed, its tongue flickering over needle teeth. "You're big. You'll be tough. My master likes those who have spirit." The demon lunged. It was faster than a vampire, a blur of motion that defied the physics of the slope. But Jonathan had fought Dio Brando. He had fought the ancient, biomechanical horrors of the stone mask. As the demon's claws reached for his throat, Jonathan didn't flinch. He stepped into the strike, his forearm catching the demon's wrist. Sendo Hamon, overdrive. He didn't need a sword. He didn't need a Nichirin blade. He gripped the demon's arm, and the golden sparks of the ripple surged through his fingertips. The effect was immediate and horrific. Where Jonathan's skin met the demon's flesh, there was no bruise, no cut. There was only smoke. The demon's arm began to sizzle, turning a blackened, charred husk in a heartbeat. The creature shrieked, a sound of primal existential agony. What is this? It burns. My blood is... It's melting." It tried to regenerate, its cells screaming to knit back together. But the Hamon was a poison to its very biology. The golden energy raced up the demon's arm like a fuse, turning bone to ash and meat to cinder. It wasn't just a wound. It was the sun itself, channeled through a human heart and delivered with the force of a locomotive. Jonathan watched with a grim, pitying expression as the demon collapsed, its body disintegrating into gray flakes before it even hit the snow. He knew this look. He knew this end. There was no dignity in this death, only the cessation of a tragedy. The boy in the checkered haori stared, his mouth agape. He looked at the pile of ash, then up at the Titan in the tattered suit. You didn't have a sword. Who are you? Jonathan exhaled, the golden glow fading from his skin, replaced by the deep, agonizing ache of his previous injuries. He offered a hand, a large, calloused, gentle hand. My name is Jonathan Joestar, he said, his voice straining but kind. And I believe I am a long way from home. Before the boy could answer, the air changed again. A new vibration, colder, sharper, and faster than the demon, approached from the canopy above. A blur of mismatched Haori patterns landed 10 feet away. Giyu Tomioka, the water Hashira, stood with his blade drawn, his eyes narrowed at the giant man, and the demon girl hiding in the basket behind the boy. Giyu didn't look at the boy. He looked at Jonathan. He looked at the air around Jonathan, which was still shimmering with the residual heat of the ripple. You, Giyu said, his voice like a glacier. What style of breathing was that? There was no water, no flame, only light. Jonathan felt the shift in the atmosphere. This newcomer wasn't a monster, but he wasn't a friend either. He was a professional, a man who lived in a world of binary choices. Kill or be killed. It is called the ripple, Jonathan said, stepping in front of the boy. Tanjiro, and I suggest you put your sword away, sir. I have had quite enough of killing for one lifetime. Giyu's eyes didn't soften. He saw a man who had killed a demon with his bare hands, a feat that should be impossible. In the distance, the sun began to peek over the mountain's edge, but for the first time in his life, Giyu Tomioka felt like he was standing in the shadow of something much larger than the core. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button, and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in, down in the comments below. Some things can't be fixed. Giyu Tomioka did not move, but the air around him did. It rippled like the surface of a disturbed pond, a testament to the total concentration he maintained, even in a state of shock. He looked at the pile of ash, all that remained of a demon that had been, by his estimation, a mid-level threat, and then back at the giant in the tattered blue coat. There were no marks of a Nichirin blade. There was no scent of wisteria. There was only the smell of ozone and the faint, lingering heat of a summer noon. The ripple? Giyu repeated, his voice devoid of emotion, though his grip tightened on his sword. I have studied every breathing style known to the core. Flame, stone, wind, thunder, water. None of them do that. None of them turn a demon to cinder through physical contact. You are an anomaly. Jonathan Joestar stood his ground, his massive frame creating a silhouette that seemed to swallow the mountain path. Despite the exhaustion threatening to buckle his knees, his posture remained perfect, the ingrained discipline of a Victorian aristocrat. He looked down at Tanjiro, who was still shielding the box containing Nezuko. Jonathan saw the terror in the boy's eyes, but he also saw the bond, the same desperate, sacrificial love that had driven Jonathan to the bottom of the Atlantic. I am no anomaly, sir, Jonathan said, his voice regaining its resonant baritone strength. I am a man who was taught that life is a gift, and that those with the power to protect it have a sacred duty to do so. This boy is protecting his sister. She is changed, I can see that. But she has not lost her soul. I will not let you strike her. Giyu's eyes narrowed. She is a demon. She eats humans. That is the law of this world, stranger. There are no exceptions. Move aside, or I will have to go through you. The tension snapped like a frozen branch. Giyu moved with the fluid, impossible speed of the water-breathing style. First form, water surface slash. His blade became a horizontal streak of blue energy, aimed not at Jonathan's neck, but at the demon girl behind him. Jonathan didn't have a sword drawn, but he had something Giyu hadn't accounted for. The ultimate defense of the Sendo. Zoom punch. Jonathan's arm didn't just move. The joints dislocated with a sickening pop, propelled by a localized burst of ripple energy that numbed the pain and extended his reach by nearly a foot. His fist, glowing with a dull golden radiance, slammed into the flat of Giyu's blade. The impact sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. Giyu's eyes widened as he felt the vibration travel up his arm, not a blunt force, but a rhythmic, oscillating energy that threatened to shatter his Nichirin steel. He flipped backward, landing lightly on a snow-covered branch, his sleeve still smoking where Jonathan's ripple had grazed the fabric. You dislocated your own arm to reach me, Giyu noted. Watching as Jonathan's muscles spasmed, and the joint snapped back into place with a wet thud. Jonathan didn't even wince. And your energy? It isn't just physical. It's biological. Who sent you? The Ubuyashiki family? I know no such name, Jonathan replied, his breath coming in steady, golden puffs. I only know that I cannot allow a cold-blooded execution in front of a grieving child. The stalemate was interrupted by a sharp, rhythmic cawing. A Kasugai crow descended from the gray sky, its black wings beating against the frost. Gao! Message! Message! The bird shrieked, its voice unnervingly human. Bring the stranger! Bring the boy! Bring the demon! The master commands it! Cow! To the headquarters! Giyu sheathed his sword in one smooth motion, the blue light vanishing. It seems your fate is no longer in my hands. If the master has taken an interest in you, it is either your salvation or your end. The journey that followed was a blur of exhaustion for Jonathan. He was treated with a mixture of profound suspicion and clinical fascination by the Kakushi, the cleanup crew of the Demon Slayer Corps. They were used to gore, used to the broken bodies of children, and the charred remains of monsters. But they were not used to a man who looked like he had been sculpted from marble, and who radiated a literal physical warmth that melted the snow where he sat. By the time they reached the Butterfly Mansion, the Corps' primary medical and recovery facility, Jonathan was at his limit. His wounds from the ship, though cauterized by his own Hamon, were deep. As he was led through the sterile, wood-paneled halls, he saw the reality of this world's heroes. It reminded him of the darker corners of London's East End, but with a supernatural tint. He passed rooms where young men and women lay in rows, their limbs missing, their eyes vacant with the thousand-yard stare of those who had seen things that defied reason. This wasn't the heroic struggle he had imagined. It was a meat grinder. The Demon Slayer Corps was a machine fueled by the blood of the young, a desperate, underfunded resistance against a predator that had been winning for 1,000 years. So, this is the sun-breather Giyu reported? The voice was light, airy, and entirely insincere. Jonathan turned to see a woman with a butterfly-patterned haori and a smile that didn't reach her violet eyes. Shinobu Kocho, the insect Hashira, moved with a grace that masked a deep, roiling cynicism. She walked up to Jonathan, her head barely reaching his chest, and leaned in close. "My, you are a big one," she whispered, her smile twitching. "And you smell wonderful like a greenhouse in July. Tell me, Mr. Joestar, is it true? Did you really kill a demon without a blade? Did you just touch it and make it go away?" Jonathan looked down at her, feeling the sharp, jagged edges of her grief. She smelled of chemicals and hidden stingers. "I used the ripple, madam. It is the energy of life itself. It mirrors the frequency of the sun." Shinobu's smile widened, but her eyes grew colder. "The sun. We've been looking for the sun for a very long time. We've watched our sisters and brothers get eaten while we waited for the sun to rise. And here you are, walking around with it in your veins." She reached out, her gloved fingers hovering just inches from his skin. "I wonder, if I opened you up, would you bleed light? Or would you just bleed like the rest of us?" "I bleed for those who cannot," Jonathan said simply. The conversation was cut short as the doors at the end of the hall opened. Two young girls with identical white hair and vacant expressions stood there. "The master is ready," they said in unison. Jonathan was led into a tranquil courtyard, the scent of wisteria so thick it was nearly suffocating. At the far end sat a man with a pale, scarred face, Kagaya Ubuyashiki. He looked frail, the mark of a curse eating away at his skin, yet he possessed an aura of calm that even Jonathan's Hamon couldn't quite penetrate. Around the courtyard stood the Hashira, the seven of this world. The pillars of the core. There was the hulking Giome, weeping silently, the scarred and volatile Sanemi, the flamboyant Tengen. They looked at Jonathan not as a man, but as a weapon, or a threat. "Jonathan Joestar," Kagaya said, his voice a soft caress that seemed to vibrate in Jonathan's very marrow. "Welcome to the end of your world and the beginning of ours. You carry a light that shouldn't exist. Tell me, in your world, did the monsters win? Or did a gentleman like you truly find a way to kill the dark?" Jonathan knelt, not out of submission, but out of respect for the man's evident suffering. "In my world, the fight cost me everything. But I believe that as long as one heart beats with the rhythm of the sun, the dark has already lost." Sanemi Shinazugawa spat on the wooden floor, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. Pretty words for a freak. Let's see how that rhythm sounds when I start cutting. The courtyard was silent, the kind of silence that precedes a firing squad. The wisteria trees dangled their purple blossoms like nooses, their scent a chemical wall designed to keep the monsters out, and the martyrs in. To Jonathan Joestar, the atmosphere felt sickeningly familiar. It reminded him of the ogre street of his youth, or the sterile, cold rooms of the Joestar estate after Dio had begun his slow poisoning of their father. It was a place where power was the only currency, and morality was a luxury few could afford. Kagaya Ubuyashiki sat motionless, his sightless eyes seemingly fixed on the horizon of Jonathan's soul. The Hashira, the elite products of this war, stood like statues of jagged glass. They weren't just warriors. They were survivors who had traded their humanity for the strength to kill things that didn't die. The silence was shattered by a heavy, wooden thud. Sanemi Shinazugawa, the Wind Hashira, stepped into the center of the gravel circle. In his hand, he gripped the box containing Nezuko Kamado. His face was a roadmap of scars, white, raised lines of trauma that spoke of a man who had looked into the abyss and decided to bite it back. "Master," Sanemi rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "We're wasting time with these pleasantries. We have a boy who travels with a demon, and a giant who claims to breathe like the sun. In the core, we have a way of dealing with anomalies. We cut them until we see what's inside." Without warning, Sanemi unsheathed his blade and thrust it through the wood of the box. A muffled, pained grunt echoed from within. "No! Stop it!" Tanjiro screamed, his hands bound behind his back, his face pressed into the dirt by the weight of the Hashira's collective pressure. Jonathan felt the rhythm of his heart skip, not out of fear, but out of a profound, rising indignation. He had seen Dio kick his dog Danny. He had seen the callousness of those who felt their power gave them the right to torment the weak. This was no different. These were heroes, acting with the same petty cruelty as the villains they hunted. "Release the child, sir," Jonathan said. He didn't move, but the air around him began to shimmer. The gravel beneath his boots vibrated, tiny stones dancing in the wake of a frequency that shouldn't exist in the natural world. "You have made your point. To continue is not justice, it is cowardice." Sanmi laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. "Cowardice? I've buried more friends than you've had hot meals, gentlemen. This isn't a game. This is a war of extermination. If she's a demon, she'll eat. If she eats, she dies. And if you're her protector, you die with her." Sanemi sliced his own arm, the scent of Marechi blood, rare and intoxicating to demons, filling the courtyard. He let the blood drip onto the box, the crimson liquid sizzling against the wood. "Come on, little monster. Show the master your true face. Show this big freak why we kill your kind." The box door creaked open. Nezuko crawled out, her pupils slit, her bamboo muzzle slick with saliva. She stared at Sanemi's arm, her body trembling with a hunger that was biological, primal, and nearly impossible to resist. Jonathan watched, his Hamon senses flaring. He could feel the struggle within the girl, the way her human cells fought against the corruptive influence of Muzan's blood. It was the same struggle he had seen in those Dio had turned into ghouls. But there was a spark here, a tether of love that refused to snap. Sanemi stepped closer, shoving his bleeding arm toward her face. "Eat. Prove me right." Jonathan didn't wait for the verdict. He didn't use a breathing style, for he knew none. He used the fundamental law of life magnetism, with a sudden explosive burst of speed that lacked the grace of the water style, but possessed the raw power of a falling mountain. Jonathan was there. He didn't strike Sanemi. Instead, he placed his massive hand directly over Sanemi's wound. Sendo Hamon, healing overdrive. The gold light didn't just glow, it pulsed. Sanemi gasped as a sensation of intense, searing heat flooded his arm. Before the eyes of the stunned Hashira, the jagged gash on Sanemi's forearm began to knit together. The blood ceased to flow, the skin sealing shut with an unnatural, forced vitality. Within seconds, only a fresh pink scar remained. Jonathan pulled his hand back, his chest heaving. "The girl has refused your blood once. She will not be tempted by a wound that no longer exists. Is that sufficient proof for your trial, or do you require more blood to feel like a man?" Sanemi stared at his arm, then at Jonathan, his face contorted with a rage so pure it bordered on psychosis. You dared touch me? You used that freakish light to interfere with a pillar's duty?" I used it to prevent a murder, Jonathan replied, stepping between Sanemi and Nezuko. He looked at the girl, who had turned her head away from the scent, her eyes welling with tears. Look at her. She is in more pain than any of you, yet she chooses restraint. Can you say the same, Wind Hashira? Enough. The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of a decree. Kagaya Ubuyashiki leaned forward. Sanemi, sheathe your blade. Jonathan Joestar has demonstrated something we have lacked for a century, a way to intervene without destruction. He does not just kill demons, he heals the world around them. Obanai Iguro, the serpent Hashira, hissed from his perch on a nearby branch. Master, you cannot be serious. He is an outsider. His ripple is an unknown variable. If he can heal wounds, he can also hide them. For all we know, he is a creation of the 12 Kizuki, sent to infiltrate us with a holy facade. His heart beats with the rhythm of the sun, Obanai, Kagaya said softly. I cannot see him, but I can hear the melody of his spirit. It is a song that has no room for Muzan's discord. He turned his head toward Jonathan. Mr. Joestar, we are a dying order. Every year we lose our brightest to the darkness. We use breathing styles to mimic the elements, to give our human bodies the strength of the world. But you are the element. You carry the sun within you. Kagaya coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made the Hashira flinch in sympathy. I will grant Tanjiro Kamado and his sister a reprieve. But for you, Jonathan, there is a different price. You will not be a student. You will be a catalyst. You will join the mission to Mount Nadagumo. Our boys, our lower-ranked slayers, are being slaughtered there, as we speak. Go, show my children that the sun has not forgotten them. If you return, we will discuss your place in this world. If you die, then you were merely a beautiful dream. Jonathan bowed, his mind already racing. He saw the way the Hashira looked at him, some with curiosity, like Mitsuri Kanroji, others with cold, calculating murder, like Sanemi and Obanai. This wasn't a brotherhood, it was a corporate military, and he was the new asset being field-tested in a live fire zone. I will go, Jonathan said, his voice echoing off the wisteria-laden walls. Not for your corps, and not for your war. I will go because there are people in pain, and a gentleman never turns his back on a cry for help. As he walked toward the exit, Tanjiro scrambled to his feet, Nezuko safely back in her box. Mr. Joestar! Wait, why are you helping us? You don't even know us. Jonathan paused, looking back at the boy. In Tanjiro, he saw a mirror of his own lost innocence. Because Tanjiro, in a world that tries to turn us into monsters or machines, the only thing that matters is that we remain human, even if it kills us. High above, hidden in the shadows of the estate's rafters, a pair of eyes watched Jonathan depart. They weren't the eyes of a slayer, nor a common demon. They were eyes marked with a rank that would make even the Hashira tremble. The scent of Jonathan's Hamon had already reached the ears of the king. The hunt for the Sunbreather had begun. The training grounds of the Demon Slayer Corps did not resemble the manicured lawns of the Joestar estate. There were no cricket bats or rowing oars here. Instead, the air was thick with the scent of sawdust, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of blood that had been scrubbed but never truly removed from the floorboards. It was a factory of violence, a place where children were forged into blades and discarded the moment they chipped. Jonathan Joestar stood in the center of the dojo, his massive frame draped in a simple training yukata that strained against his shoulders. Across from him, Sanemi Shinazugawa bounced on the balls of his feet, his Nichirin blade replaced by a heavy wooden bokken that, in his hands, was every bit as lethal as steel. The other Hashira watched from the shadows of the veranda like a board of directors assessing a new, volatile piece of hardware. The master says you're a catalyst, Sanemi spat, his eyes wide and bloodshot, reflecting a mind that had long since abandoned peace. I say you're a liability. You don't use a sword. You don't use the breath. You just stand there and glow like a damn firefly. In a real fight, a demon will take your head before you can blink. I have survived encounters that would freeze the blood of most men, Shinazugawa, Jonathan said, his voice calm, his breathing already falling into the deep, rhythmic cadence of the ripple. I do not seek a fight with you, but if you require a demonstration of the ripple's power, I will not deny you. Less talk, more dying, Sanemi moved. Wind breathing, first form, Dust whirlwind cutter. He didn't just run, he became a localized cyclone. The wooden sword vanished in a blur of motion, creating vacuums of air that sliced into the floorboards as he charged. To a normal human, it was an invisible death. To Tanjiro, watching from the sidelines, it was a terrifying display of a pillar's true speed. But Jonathan Joestar did not see speed. He felt vibrations. Every atom in the air was a string, and Sanemi was plucking them with discordant hate. Life magnetism overdrive. Jonathan didn't dodge. He stepped forward, his hands snapping out to catch the wooden blade. To the onlookers, it looked like suicide. Sanemi's wooden sword was moving with enough force to shatter a boulder. But as the wood connected with Jonathan's palm, there was no sound of breaking bone. Instead, a brilliant golden spark erupted at the point of contact. Jonathan's skin didn't tear. The ripple energy, concentrated at the surface of his palm, created a repulsive force, a cushion of high-frequency vitality that acted like invisible armor. The wooden sword halted mid-swing, vibrating so violently that Sanemi's hands began to numb. "What?" Sanemi roared, his muscles bulging as he tried to force the blade through. "How are you holding it?" "The ripple is the energy of life, sir," Jonathan explained, his eyes locking onto Sanemi's. "It flows through everything. If I match the frequency of your strike, your strength becomes mine to redirect." Jonathan twisted his wrist. The wooden sword didn't just move, it hummed. Sendo Hamon, discarded rhythm. With a flick of his fingers, Jonathan sent a pulse of Hamon back through the bakken. Sanemi felt as if he had grabbed a live electrical wire. His arms flew back, the wooden sword shattering into 1,000 splinters that glowed with a faint, dying amber light. Sanemi stumbled back, his breath hitching. His hands were red, the skin tingling with a warmth that felt like a sunburn from the inside out. The dojo went deathly silent. Even Gyome, the stone Hashira, tilted his head, the sound of the wood disintegrating, telling him more than 1,000 words. He didn't just stop the blow, Tengen Uzui whispered, his flamboyant bravado momentarily replaced by genuine tactical interest. He neutralized the kinetic energy and fed it back. That's not a breathing style. That's alchemy. Sanemi wasn't finished. The humiliation was a fuel he had burned for years. He discarded the hilt of the broken bokken and lunged with his bare hands, his fingers curled into claws. Wind breathing, 8th form, primary gale slash. Even without a sword, he could manipulate the air pressure. A wave of cutting wind erupted from his palms, aimed directly at Jonathan's throat. Jonathan didn't move his arms. He simply took a deep, resonant breath. His chest expanded, and for a second, his heartbeat was audible to everyone in the room. A deep, thumping rhythm like a war drum. Sunlight yellow overdrive. Jonathan unleashed a flurry of punches. Not at Sanemi, but at the air itself. Each strike was a blur of gold. His fists moving so fast, they created a wall of heat. The gale slash didn't just fail, it was incinerated. The cold, cutting winds of the Hashira were swallowed by the radiant, artificial sunlight of the Joestar. The shockwave knocked Sanemi off his feet, sending him skidding across the floorboards until he hit the far wall. He sat there, dazed, the smell of singed hair and ozone clinging to his uniform. He wasn't seriously hurt. Jonathan had pulled the final blow, but the message was clear. Jonathan stood in the center of the room, his yukata smoking slightly, his blue eyes filled with a weary compassion. He didn't look like a victor. He looked like a man who was tired of being a weapon. "You fight with hate, Shinazugawa," Jonathan said, his voice echoing in the rafters. "It makes you fast. It makes you lethal. But hate has a limit. It is a fire that consumes the wood it burns. The ripple is a fire that grows the forest. If you go to Mount Natagumo with nothing but malice in your heart, the demons won't have to kill you. You will simply burn out. You arrogant freak," Sanemi coughed, pushing himself up. But the fire in his eyes was different now. It wasn't just rage. It was a confused, jagged respect. Shinobu Kocho stepped out from the shadows, her butterfly haori fluttering. She looked at the charred remains of the bokken, then at Jonathan's unmarred hands. "Impressive, Mr. Joestar. Most impressive. You've managed to offend our most violent member and prove your utility in under 3 minutes. Vought would have loved to put you on a billboard." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Jonathan could hear. "But remember this, the demons on that mountain don't care about your gentleman's code." They are puppets of a boy who plays with strings. And strings are very good at cutting even the brightest light. Then I shall have to shine brighter, Jonathan replied. The preparations were finished. The boys of the Corps, the nameless, lower-ranked slayers, were already dying in the dark woods of Natagumo. As Jonathan walked toward the gate, Tanjiro and Inosuke waiting for him, with a mixture of awe and intimidation, he felt the weight of the mission. He wasn't just going to kill demons. He was entering a meat grinder, where children were the fodder and corporate-level apathy was the commander. He looked at his hands, still warm with the ripple. He had promised a dying Dio that their fates were intertwined. Now, he realized that his fate was intertwined with every broken soul in this cruel, beautiful world. "Let us go," Jonathan said to the boys. "The sun is setting, and there are people who need to see the dawn." Mount Natagumo did not welcome visitors. It digested them. As Jonathan Joestar stepped onto the narrow, dirt path leading into the heart of the forest, the air changed from the crisp chill of the highlands to a stagnant, humid soup that tasted of wet silk and decomposing meat. This was the front line of the war, a place where the Demon Slayer Corps sent its lowest-ranked assets, the Mizunoto, to die in the dark so the Hashira wouldn't have to waste their time on clutter. It was the ultimate corporate cynicism, high volume, low-cost sacrifice in exchange for a few hours of reconnaissance. Beside him, Tanjiro Kamado walked with his hand on his sword, his nose twitching in a state of constant, sensory overload. To the boy, the mountains smelled of 1,000 tragedies. To Jonathan, it felt like a distortion in the rhythm of the world. The Hamon in his blood was agitated, reacting to the countless microscopic vibrations humming through the trees. "Stay close, Tanjiro," Jonathan murmured, his voice low and resonant. "The trees, they aren't just rustling, they're singing, but it's a song of marionettes." They hadn't walked half a mile before they saw the first boys of the Corps. These weren't the proud warriors of the Butterfly Mansion. These were terrified teenagers, their uniforms shredded, their eyes wide with a vacancy that transcended fear. One of them, a boy no older than 15, was suspended 5 feet off the ground, his limbs twitching in jagged, unnatural arcs. "Help me," the boy rasped, his head snapping back with a sickening crack. "He's alive!" Tanjiro cried, rushing forward. "Wait!" Jonathan shouted, but it was too late. The boy in the air suddenly swung his sword, the blade whistling through the air with a speed no human could achieve. It was a perfect, lethal arc aimed directly at Tanjiro's neck. Tanjiro barely parried, the force of the blow sending him skidding back into the mud. The Slayer in the air didn't stop. He began to move like a spider, his body twisting in ways that shattered his own joints. "Strings," Jonathan hissed, his blue eyes narrowing. He looked up into the canopy. The moonlight filtered through a dense, silver canopy of webs, thousands of nearly invisible threads, trailing down from the heights, like the veins of a dying god. "They aren't fighting us. They are being used as meat shields. This isn't a battle, it's a puppet show." From the shadows, more slayers emerged. Some were dead, their corpses reanimated by the tension of the silk. Others were still screaming as their own arms were forced to stab their comrades. It was the most brutal form of collateral damage Jonathan had ever witnessed. A system that didn't just kill its soldiers, but turned their very remains into weapons against their brothers. "We have to cut the strings!" Tanjiro yelled, his sword flashing in the dark. "Water breathing! Second form! Water wheel!" He spun through the air, his blade severing the threads above the trapped boy. The boy fell, but before he could even hit the ground, new threads snapped out from the trees, latching onto his skin like hooks. He was yanked back into the air, his shoulder dislocating with a wet pop. "It's no use," the trapped Slayer wailed. "She's everywhere. She's watching through the silk." Jonathan stepped forward, his chest expanding, as he took a breath that seemed to pull the very humidity out of the air. He didn't draw his sword. Instead, he slammed his massive palms together. "Sendo Hamon, silver ripple spreader." He didn't aim for the Slayers. He aimed for the ground and the air around them. A pulse of golden energy erupted from his body, traveling along the very threads that sought to control the mountain. Hamon is a vibration of life, and silk is an organic conductor. The ripple raced up the webs like a wildfire, the golden light turning the invisible threads into glowing, incandescent lines of fire. The forest lit up with a brilliant, artificial noon. The mother spider, hidden deep in the woods, shrieked as the feedback hit her. The silk didn't just break, it dissolved, the Hamon, purifying the demonic energy that gave the threads their strength. The slayers fell to the ground, the dead ones finally finding peace, while the living scrambled to safety. Jonathan didn't stop. He placed a hand on the nearest tree, his fingers glowing. He could feel the pulse of the mountain, the way the demon was rooted into the soil. "I have her frequency," Jonathan said, his face a mask of grim determination. "Tanjiro, take the survivors to the clearing. I will find the one pulling the strings." "But Mr. Joestar, there are hundreds of them," Tanjiro protested. "Then, I shall have to be everywhere at once," Jonathan replied. He moved through the forest, not with the stealth of a ninja, but with the unstoppable momentum of a juggernaut. Every time a spider demon lunged from the shadows, Jonathan didn't even slow down. A single, short-range pulse of Hamon, a life magnetism overdrive, sent them flying, their carapaces shattering into ash before they touched the bark. The deeper he went, the more the mountain resisted. The mother spider, sensing a threat that ignored her tricks, began to send her children horrific, man-faced spiders that scuttled through the leaves. They spat venom that hissed against Jonathan's skin, but the ripple in his blood acted as a constant, internal purge. The toxins were neutralized before they could reach his heart. His metabolism accelerated to a superhuman degree. He reached a clearing where the silk was thickest, draped over the trees like funeral shrouds. In the center sat a woman with white skin and red markings, her fingers dancing in the air as she frantically tried to reweave her web. This was the Mother, a creature born of fear and subservience to the boy king Rui. She looked at Jonathan, and for the first time in centuries, she felt a heat that wasn't the burning of her master's wrath. It was the warmth of a son she had forgotten. "You," she whispered, her hands trembling. "You aren't a slayer, you're something else." "I am a man who finds your art abhorrent, madam," Jonathan said, his voice echoing through the silk. "You use the bodies of children as your canvas. You treat life as if it were a toy to be broken and discarded. Is this the family you were promised?" The mother spider recoiled, her eyes filling with a sudden jagged grief. "You don't understand, Rui. He'll kill me if I fail. He'll cut me into pieces." "Then let me offer you a mercy that he cannot," Jonathan said. He walked toward her, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. He didn't raise his fist. He reached out a hand, the ripple glowing with a soft, gentle amber light. The same light he had used to heal Sanemi, but focused now on the spirit rather than the flesh. "A gentleman does not strike a woman who has already surrendered," Jonathan said. "But I cannot let this cycle continue. If you wish to find peace, let the sun take you. Not in pain, but in release." He placed his hand on the silk surrounding her. The Hamon flowed through the webs, a beautiful golden wave that turned the clearing into a sanctuary of light. The mother spider closed her eyes, tears of gray ash falling down her cheeks. As the ripple touched her, she didn't scream. She felt a sensation of profound, weightless warmth, the memory of a mother's touch from a life she had lost long ago. She vanished into the light, leaving behind only the scent of scorched silk and the silence of the woods. Jonathan stood alone in the clearing, his breath ragged. He had stopped the puppets, but he knew the master was still watching. From the depths of the mountain, a small, pale figure stepped out from behind a tree. It was a boy with spider-like hair and eyes that bore the mark of the lower moon 5. Rui looked at Jonathan, his expression one of cold, clinical curiosity. "You broke my mother," the boy said, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "You interfered with our family's bond. That was very rude. I think I'll make you the new father. But first, I'll have to take your legs so you don't run away." Jonathan looked at the child monster, and his heart hardened. This wasn't just a demon. This was the result of a system that rewarded psychopathy and punished weakness. "I have had enough of families built on blood, Rui," Jonathan said, the Hamon beginning to spark around his knuckles. "I think it is time you learned that the sun doesn't just provide warmth, it also brings the fire." The air around Rui didn't just feel cold, it felt segmented. Thousands of microscopic, razor-sharp threads hung in the still air, vibrating with a frequency that set Jonathan's teeth on edge. The boy demon stood in the center of this web, a pale arachnid king who viewed the world as something to be sliced and reassembled according to his whims. To Rui, family was a set of strings, a system of control where every member played a role or faced the excision of their limbs. It was the ultimate corporate nightmare, a hierarchy built on terror, disguised as belonging. "You speak of fire, stranger," Rui said, his fingers twitching as he adjusted the tension of a thread near Jonathan's throat. "But fire is chaotic. It consumes. My threads are different. They are order. They are the bonds that keep this family together. If you break a bond, you must be punished." Jonathan didn't flinch. He could feel the threads grazing the fabric of his tattered coat, the silk so sharp it parted the heavy wool without a sound. He shifted his stance, his feet grinding into the damp earth, his breathing becoming a deep, rhythmic bellows that stoked the golden furnace in his chest. "A bond is not something you impose, Rui," Jonathan said, his voice echoing with a resonant power that seemed to push back the encroaching shadows. "A bond is a choice. It is the willingness to bleed so that another may live. What you have created here is not a family, it is a cage of your own loneliness. And as a gentleman, I cannot allow a child, even one as lost as you, to continue this charade. Die." Rui's hand snapped shut. Blood demon art, cutting thread cage. From every direction, the silver threads surged toward Jonathan, crisscrossing in a geometric pattern designed to turn a human being into a pile of cubes. To Tanjiro, who had just reached the edge of the clearing, it looked like the end. The threads moved faster than the eye could follow, a shimmering net of death. But Jonathan Joestar did not move with his eyes. He moved with the ripple. He felt the threads not as visual threats, but as disruptions in the life energy of the forest. Sendo Hamon, metal silver overdrive. Jonathan reached for the hilt of the sword strapped to his back, the blade gifted to him by the dying knight Bruford. He didn't just draw it, he flooded the steel with the full, unbridled intensity of his Hamon. The sword, Luck and Pluck, didn't just shine. It erupted in a white-hot radiance that rivaled the sun. He swung the blade in a single, sweeping arc. The ripple-infused steel didn't just cut the threads, it conducted through them. As the sword touched the silk, the golden energy raced back along the lines of the web, like a lightning strike returning to its source. The thread cage didn't collapse. It incinerated, the silk turning to glowing embers before it could touch Jonathan's skin. Rui's eyes widened, the markings of Lower Moon 5 twitching in disbelief. "What? My threads? They are stronger than Nichirin steel. How can a mere human? The steel is but a vessel, Rui," Jonathan roared, lunging forward. He didn't use a water style or a flame style. He used the sheer, unstoppable momentum of a man who had climbed the stairs of Wind Knight's lot to face a god. The ripple is the power of the sun, and the sun does not care for the strength of your silk. Rui scrambled backward, his fingers dancing as he unleashed blood demon art, murderous eye basket. A dense, swirling vortex of blood-red threads erupted from the ground, spinning like a meat grinder. Jonathan didn't swerve. He took a breath so deep his ribs groaned under the pressure. He threw the Luck and Pluck sword into the air, the blade spinning like a golden propeller, and then he drove his fist into the center of the thread vortex. Sunlight yellow overdrive. His arm became a blur of golden light. Each punch was a concentrated explosion of ripple energy, 100 strikes per second, delivered with the force of a battering ram. The red threads didn't just break, they vaporized. The heat generated by the Hamon was so intense that the moisture in the air turned to steam, creating a localized fog of white and gold. Jonathan broke through the vortex and grabbed Rui by the collar of his kimono. The demon boy shrieked, his skin blistering at the mere proximity of Jonathan's touch. "Let go of me! You're hurting me!" Rui wailed, his voice suddenly sounding like the child he had once been. Jonathan looked into the boy's eyes, the eyes of a monster who had murdered his own parents because they tried to stop his transformation. He saw the void there, the crushing weight of 1,000 years of Muzan's lies. For a moment, Jonathan's resolve wavered. He remembered Dio. He remembered the tragedy of a life twisted by a mask. But then, he looked past Rui. He saw the bodies of the boys hanging in the trees. He saw the survivors, broken and traumatized, their lives forever scarred by this family. "You have forgotten what it means to be human, Rui," Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a somber, tragic whisper. "And in doing so, you have forfeited the right to walk among them. I cannot save your soul, but I can ensure you cause no more pain." Jonathan's grip tightened. He didn't strike. He simply allowed the ripple to flow from his heart, through his arm, and into the demon boy. It wasn't the violent, explosive energy of the overdrive. It was a steady, purifying heat. "This is the end of the web," Jonathan said. The Hamon surged. Rui didn't scream. He gasped as his body began to glow from the inside out. The gray, sickly light of the lower moon was swallowed by the brilliant, golden dawn of the Joestar. The boy's body began to flake away, turning into ash that smelled of burnt incense and spring rain. As Rui vanished, a shadow fell over the clearing. The temperature plummeted, and the scent of wisteria was suddenly replaced by a sharp, antiseptic smell, the scent of a hospital or a laboratory. My, a voice chirped from the canopy. "You really are a messy one, aren't you?" Shinobu Kocho, the insect Hashira, landed gracefully on a nearby branch, her butterfly Haori billowing in the wind. Behind her, the Kakushi cleanup crews began to emerge from the brush, like corporate drones tidying up a failed experiment. "You killed a lower moon with your bare hands, Mr. Joestar," Shinobu said, her smile as fixed and artificial as a porcelain mask. "The master will be very pleased. But the board of Hashira is going to have many questions about how you managed to bypass our exclusive Nichirin technology." She looked at the ash on Jonathan's hands, her eyes cold and calculating. "In this world, Jonathan, success is often more dangerous than failure. You've just proven that Vought, or in our case, the core, doesn't have a monopoly on the sun, and they don't like it when the help starts making their own light." Jonathan stood tall, his chest still heaving from the effort. He looked at the cleanup crew, who were already bagging the remains of the slayers, as if they were nothing more than defective inventory. "I did not do this for your master, or your board," Jonathan said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "I did this because it was right. If that makes me a threat to your order, then perhaps your order is not worth preserving." Shinobu's smile didn't waver, but her hand drifted toward the hilt of her stinger-like blade. "Careful, gentlemen. The mountain has many more strings than the ones you just cut." The aftermath of Mount Na-Ta-Gumo was not a victory celebration. It was a liquidation of assets. As the moon reached its zenith, the forest crawled with the Kakushi, their faces hidden behind black cloth, moving with the efficient, soulless speed of corporate cleaners. They didn't mourn the fallen Mizunoto. They cataloged them. Broken Nichirin blades were recovered for recycling. Uniforms were stripped from the cooling corpses of children to be mended and issued to the next batch of recruits. To Jonathan Joestar, watching from the edge of the clearing, it felt like standing in the middle of a slaughterhouse where the butchers wore the masks of healers. "You find our methods distasteful, Joestar-san?" Shinobu Kocho appeared at his shoulder, her footsteps as silent as a falling leaf. She was watching a Kakashi struggle to detangle a dead boy's fingers from a clump of scorched silk. Her voice remained light, almost playful, but the scent of her anger, a sharp, acidic vibration of wisteria and bitterness, was overwhelming to Jonathan's Hamon-tuned senses. "They were children, madam," Jonathan said, his voice thick with a grief that he refused to hide. "They had names. They had mothers. You treat them as if they are merely broken cogs in a machine." "They are slayers," Shinobu corrected, her eyes fixed on the moon. "And in this machine, cogs are meant to break, so the engine keeps turning. If we stopped to weep for every Mizunoto who died in the dark, we wouldn't have the strength to hold our swords. We are a non-profit organization funded by tragedy, Jonathan. Efficiency is our only morality." She turned to him, her smile widening into something truly terrifying. "But you've changed the cost-benefit analysis. A man who kills upper-tier demons with his bare hands is a high-value asset, or a dangerous competitor. The Yubuyashiki family, will want to know if your ripple can be mass-produced. Imagine it, a whole army of slayers who don't need expensive ore or years of training. Just a breath and a touch." "The ripple is not a product," Jonathan roared, his voice shaking the nearby trees. "It is a discipline of the soul. It requires a heart that beats for others. You cannot mass-produce heroism, Shinobu." "Perhaps not," she whispered, "but you can certainly weaponize it." Before Jonathan could respond, the shadows at the edge of the clearing seemed to thicken, curdling into a darkness that felt oily and ancient. The birds in the trees went silent. Even the Kakushi froze, their breathing shallow and panicked. A man stepped out from the gloom. He was dressed in a Western-style suit, a sharp, black tuxedo that looked jarringly modern against the Taisho wilderness. His skin was the color of bleached bone, and his eyes were the shade of a fresh arterial spray. Muzan Kibutsuji didn't walk. He glided through the world as if it were his personal laboratory, and everything in it was merely a specimen, waiting to be dissected. He wasn't physically present. It was a projection, a fragment of his consciousness, delivered through the shared blood of the demons Jonathan had just slain. But the pressure was real. It felt like a mountain was resting on Jonathan's chest. "So," Muzan said, his voice a cold, melodious rasp that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the brain. "This is the source of the heat. I felt my son Rui dissolve in a fire that lacked the impurity of the Nichirin. It felt familiar, like a memory of a son I have been trying to conquer for 1,000 years." Jonathan stepped forward, instinctively shielding Tanjiro and the wounded Nezuko behind his massive frame. He didn't know this man's name, but he knew his soul. It was the same void he had felt in Dio, but expanded to a global scale. This was the CEO of the night, the man who had turned the world into a factory of misery to satisfy his own ego. "You must be the architect of this nightmare," Jonathan said, his breathing deepening into the rhythmic, golden cadence of the ripple. Sparks began to dance along his knuckles, the golden energy pushing back the oppressive cold of Muzan's presence. Muzan's eyes fixed on Jonathan's hands. He didn't look threatened, he looked hungry. "Your blood? It hums. It carries the frequency of the blue spider lily. You are not a slayer. You are an evolution. You have done what I have spent centuries trying to achieve through chemistry and cruelty. You have tamed the sun within a human vessel." Muzan tilted his head, a predatory smile touching his lips. "I don't want to kill you, Jonathan Joestar. I want to consume you. I want to drink that rhythm until my cells forget the meaning of the dark. You aren't a man to me. You are the ultimate prize, the golden key to my immortality." "I am a Joestar," Jonathan shouted, the ripple erupting from his body in a brilliant golden aura that shattered the projection's hold on the forest. "And as long as I draw breath, you will find nothing but the fire that will one day turn your empire to ash." Muzan's image flickered, his eyes glowing with a sudden, jagged rage. "Bravado is a human defect, Jonathan. I have all the time in the world. I will send my upper moons. I will burn down your corb. I will take everything you love and turn it into the very monsters you hate. And when you are broken, when you are kneeling in the ruins of your gentleman's code, I will take your son for myself." The projection vanished, leaving the clearing plunging back into the cold moonlight. The Kikuchi were trembling, some of them weeping in the dirt. Shinobu stood motionless, her face pale, her grip on her sword so tight her knuckles were white. "He came for you," she whispered, the sarcasm finally gone from her voice. "The king of demons, he didn't even look at the rest of us. We were just background noise to him. You've just painted a target on the back of every slayer in Japan, Jonathan." "Then, let him come," Jonathan said, his voice somber but unshakable. He looked at Tanjiro, who was staring at him with a mixture of terror and awe. "The sun does not hide, because the clouds are dark. It waits for the moment to break through." In the distance, the first rays of the true dawn began to gray the horizon. But for Jonathan, the battle had only just begun. He had survived the ship. He had survived the mountain. Now, he was the primary objective in a war between a corporate cult of slayers and a god-king of monsters. Giyu Tomioka stepped out from the trees, his blue haori stained with the blood of the demons he had executed on the other side of the slope. He looked at Jonathan, then at the scorched earth where Muzan's image had stood. "The master has sent word," Giyu said, his voice flat. "The trial is over. You are no longer a guest. You are being moved to the Butterfly Mansion under high security protection. In the core, Jonathan, that's another word for containment." Jonathan looked at his hands, which were still warm with the ripple. He saw the way Giyu and Shinobu looked at him, as a weapon to be guarded, a resource to be managed. He realized then that in this world there was no room for a gentleman. There was only the asset and the predator. "Then lead the way," Jonathan said, his head held high. "But know this, the sun cannot be contained. It can only be shared, or it can burn." The Butterfly Mansion had been transformed. What was once a place of quiet recovery and the scent of medicinal herbs had become a high-security research facility. To the Demon Slayer Corps, Jonathan Joestar was no longer a man. He was Project Soul, a biological miracle that required constant monitoring, testing, and containment. He sat in a room at the heart of the mansion. the walls reinforced with wisteria-infused timber, and the air thick with the incense of a dozen different purification rituals. Through the rice paper screens, he could see the shadows of the guards, slayers whose only job was to ensure the asset didn't decide to take his sunlight elsewhere. Shinobu Kocho entered the room not with a tray of tea, but with a tray of silver needles. Her smile was as sharp as the instruments she carried. For 3 days, she had been drawing Jonathan's blood, testing his lung capacity, and mapping the electrical rhythm of his nervous system. "Your metabolism is truly fascinating, Jonathan," she said, her voice clinical and detached. "Your cells don't just store energy, they vibrate. When you breathe, your blood oxygen levels spike to 4 times the human norm. The Ubuyashiki estate is very interested in seeing if we can extract the catalyst. If we can infuse this ripple into our Nichirin forge, we could end the war by next spring." Jonathan looked at her, his blue eyes weary. He thought of Vaught's laboratories, the sterile, cold places where people were turned into products. "You speak of the ripple as if it were a chemical, madam. I have told you, it is a discipline. It is the harmony of the spirit. You cannot bottle it any more than you can bottle the wind. In this world we bottle everything," Shinobu countered, her needle hovering over his arm. "We bottle poison. We bottle grief. We bottle the souls of our dead to give our blade strength. Why should your light be any different?" The debate was interrupted by a sound that made the very foundations of the mansion groan. It wasn't an explosion. It was a sigh of utter, absolute cold. Outside, the temperature plummeted 50 degrees in a single heartbeat. The wisteria trees, the mansion's primary defense, didn't just wither. They shattered, the blossoms turning into shards of purple ice. "They're here," Jonathan whispered, his Hamon senses screaming. Muzan hadn't sent a single demon. He had sent a retrieval team, a cluster of new model demons, their bodies bloated with an excessive amount of his blood, specifically engineered to withstand the atmospheric pressure of the ripple. They didn't come through the gates. They emerged from the shadows of the floorboards, their bodies like liquid ink. The mansion erupted into chaos. The boys, the wounded slayers in the recovery wards, were trapped in their beds as the ink demons began to materialize in the hallways. The guards, focused on Jonathan, were caught off guard. Shouts and the sound of breaking wood echoed through the facility. "The asset! Secure the asset!" a commander shouted from the courtyard. "Abandon the wards! Protect Joestar at all costs!" Jonathan stood up, the silver needles in his arms snapping like toothpicks. He didn't look at the guards, he looked toward the recovery wing, where he could hear the screams of the helpless. "Did you hear that, Shinobu?" Jonathan asked, his voice low and dangerous. "They just ordered the abandonment of the wounded. They're willing to let those children be slaughtered to keep me in a cage." "It's tactical necessity," Shinobu cried, her hand on her sword. "If Muzan takes you, the world ends. Those slayers are already broken. They are acceptable losses." "Not to me," Jonathan said. He didn't use the door. He drove his shoulder through the wisteria-reinforced wall, the wood splintering into toothpicks under the force of a man who had once hoisted an anvil over his head with one hand. He sprinted down the hall, his heart beating with a rhythm that felt like a localized sun. He reached the primary ward, just as the first ink demon was leaning over the bed of a young girl with a bandaged face. The demon was a mass of oily tentacles and pale, weeping eyes. It turned toward Jonathan, its mouth opening to reveal a void of obsidian teeth. "Sendo Hamon, Scorched Earth Overdrive." Jonathan didn't punch the demon. He slammed his foot into the floorboards. The ripple didn't travel through the air. It traveled through the very architecture of the mansion. The golden energy raced through the wood, turning the floor into a literal field of sunlight. The ink demon didn't just burn, it evaporated. The oily substance of its body turning to steam instantly. But there were dozens of them. They were pouring from the ceilings, their cold aura suppressing the natural warmth of the room. Jonathan stood in the center of the ward, his arms spread wide. He could feel his own wounds from Natagumo reopening under the strain, his tattered coat staining red. He looked at the wounded slayers, the collateral damage of this corporate war, and he felt a surge of righteous fury that transcended physical limits. "Get behind me!" Jonathan roared. The demons lunged simultaneously. Jonathan didn't dodge. He took a breath that seemed to drain the oxygen from the room, his chest expanding to a terrifying degree. Sunlight yellow, mega overdrive. He didn't just strike, he became a star. A blinding golden dome of ripple energy erupted from his body, filling the entire ward. To the demons, it was like being dropped into the heart of a furnace. Their cells, overloaded with Muzan's blood, reacted violently to the pure sunlight. They didn't just die. They detonated in a series of silent, gray flashes. The light was so intense that the Kikuchi in the courtyard had to shield their eyes. When the radiance finally faded, Jonathan was still standing, his skin glowing a dull, angry red, his breath coming in ragged, golden gasps. The ink demons were gone. The wounded were safe. But the price was visible. The mansion's ward was scorched, the wood blackened and smoking. And at the end of the hall, the board had arrived. Sanemi, Obanai, and Giyu stood there, their swords drawn. They hadn't come to help. They had come to reclaim their property. You destroyed the containment field, Obanai hissed, his snake-like eyes fixed on the devastation. You risked the asset's safety for a handful of Mizunoto, who will likely die of their infections anyway. You are a fool, Joestar. And you are monsters, Jonathan replied, his voice a rasping growl. He looked at the children he had just saved, then at the heroes who viewed them as trash. You talk about saving humanity, but you have forgotten what humanity looks like. If this is the justice of your core, then I want no part of it. It's not about what you want, Sanemi said, stepping forward, his blade humming with the wind breath. The master might be soft on you, but we know what you are. You're a weapon that doesn't know its place, and a weapon that won't fire on command needs to be broken and reforged. Jonathan raised his fists, the gold light flickering around his knuckles. He was exhausted, bleeding and surrounded by the most lethal warriors in the world. But as he looked at the terrified faces of the wounded behind him, he knew he wasn't just fighting demons anymore. He was fighting the system that created them. The air in the Butterfly Mansion's corridor didn't just smell of smoke and ozone, it smelled of the same clinical, detached cruelty Jonathan Joestar had fought his entire life. Sanemi Shinazugawa's blade was leveled at Jonathan's throat, the steel humming with a high-frequency vibration that promised a clean, surgical excision. Behind him, Obanai Iguro's serpent coiled around his neck, its eyes as cold and transactional as a lawyer's gaze. They didn't see a man who had just saved 20 lives. They saw a malfunctioning piece of military hardware that had dared to prioritize collateral over the mission. You don't understand the world you've stepped into, Joestar, Obanai hissed, his voice echoing in the scorched hallway. In the core, we don't have the luxury of gentlemanly choices. We are a machine designed for one purpose, the survival of the species through the elimination of the threat. You are now the threat. Then your species is already dead, Jonathan replied, his voice a low, resonant rumble. He stood amidst the wounded, his tattered blue coat scorched, his blood dripping onto the charred floorboards. If you must destroy the very thing you claim to protect to achieve victory, then you are not heroes. You are merely the other side of the same coin. Sanemi didn't answer with words. He moved with the wind breathing. Seventh form, gale, sudden gusts. He didn't aim for a kill, not yet, but for the tendons in Jonathan's legs. The air became a series of invisible razors. Jonathan, exhausted and pushed to his physical limit, didn't dodge. He slammed his fist into the floorboards, sending a localized Hamon pulse through the wood that acted like a sonic boom, disrupting the air pressure and shattering Sanemi's momentum. The clash was interrupted not by the Hashira, but by a sudden, sickening shift in the atmosphere. The temperature didn't just drop. The air itself seemed to turn into a vacuum. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated martial intent smashed through the roof of the mansion, sending shards of tile and timber flying like shrapnel. In the center of the debris stood a man, or a creature, that had once been one. His skin was pale, etched with blue crystalline tattoos that pulsed with a rhythmic predatory light. His hair was a shocking pink, and his eyes bore the terrifying kanji of Upper Moon 3. Akaza looked at the scene, the wounded slayers, the standoff, the giant in the tattered suit, and he smiled. It wasn't the smile of a monster. It was the smile of a connoisseur who had just walked into the finest gallery in the world. What a beautiful sight, Akaza said, his voice light and airy. He ignored the Hashira entirely, his eyes locking onto Jonathan Joestar. I felt it from across the prefecture. A rhythm. A vibration of life so pure, so untainted by the filth of this world's weaklings. You aren't like these pillars. You don't rely on steel to mimic the world. You are the world. Sanemi and Obanai didn't hesitate. They were the seven of this world's corporate hierarchy, trained to eliminate high-tier threats with cold efficiency. They lunged simultaneously, a whirlwind of wind and serpent strikes aimed at Akaza's neck. Akaza didn't even draw a weapon. He deployed his blood demon art, Compass Needle. A snowflake-shaped light erupted under his feet, and he moved with a speed that made the Hashira look like they were standing still. With two casual, lightning-fast strikes, he shattered Sanemi's sword and punched a hole through Obanai's shoulder. The elite of the corps were tossed aside like defective units on an assembly line. "Stay out of this trash," Akaza said, not even looking back at the bleeding Hashira. He stepped toward Jonathan. "My name is Akaza. I am the pinnacle of martial strength in this era. And you are the sun breather. Muzan wants your blood, but I want your spirit. I want to see if that ripple of yours can survive the crushing weight of the void." Jonathan pushed himself to his feet, his muscles screaming, his vision blurring. He looked at Giyu, who was standing frozen at the end of the hall, his hand shaking on his hilt. Jonathan realized then that he was the only thing standing between this monster and the 20 wounded slayers behind him. There would be no backup, no corporate rescue, just a man and the monster the system had failed to contain. "I am Jonathan Joestar," he rasped, the Hamon beginning to spark around his knuckles, though the light was dimming. "And I have faced your kind before. You speak of spirit, but you are nothing more than a parasite, feeding on the fear of those weaker than you." "Then prove it," Akaza challenged. The battle that followed was a descent into the visceral reality of the boys' universe, a collision of godlike power and horrific physical consequences. Akaza didn't fight like a demon. He fought like a master of the Soryu style, his punches creating shockwaves that turned the mansion's walls to dust. Jonathan countered with the only thing he had left, life magnetism. He used the ripple to harden his muscles, to heal his shattered ribs mid-fight, and to catch Akaza's fists with his bare palms. The air was filled with the sound of snapping bone and the hiss of evaporating blood. Jonathan was being dismantled. Akaza was faster, stronger, and possessed a healing factor that made the ripple look like a child's toy. Each strike from the upper moon tore away chunks of Jonathan's flesh, the blue tattoos of the demon glowing brighter, with every drop of Joestar blood spilled. "Why do you persist?" Akaza laughed, his fist burying itself in Jonathan's stomach, lifting the giant off the floor. "You are dying. Your lungs are filling with blood. Your ripple is flickering. Become a demon, Jonathan. Let Muzan's blood turn that rhythm of yours into an eternal symphony. We could fight for 1,000 years." Jonathan spat a mouthful of blood into Akaza's face. He didn't pull away. Instead, he grabbed Akaza's wrist with a grip that even the demon couldn't break. "Because," Jonathan whispered, his heart performing one final, desperate, life-ending rhythm. "A gentleman never accepts an invitation from a cad." Jonathan's eyes turned a brilliant, incandescent gold. He didn't aim for Akaza's head. He aimed for the compass needle beneath their feet. He poured every remaining ounce of his life force, his memories of Arena, his love for his father, his tragic respect for Dio, into a single, terminal overdrive. Sunlight yellow. Infinite overdrive. The mansion didn't just explode, it vanished in a pillar of pure white light that reached the clouds. The ripple didn't just burn Akaza, it resonated with the demon's very cells, forcing them to experience the weight of 1,000 years of sunlight in a single microsecond. Akaza shrieked as his body began to disintegrate, the blue tattoos turning to ash. But the consequence was irreversible. The force of the technique shattered the corridor, the floorboards, and Jonathan's own body. As the light faded, the ward was a smoking ruin. Akaza was gone, forced into a desperate partial regeneration as he fled into the shadows of the night, his pride shattered alongside his physical form. Jonathan Joestar lay in the center of the crater, his chest barely moving. His arms were blackened, his eyes vacant. Giyu Tomioka knelt beside him, his face finally breaking into a mask of pure, human horror. "Why?" Giyu whispered, looking at the wounded slayers who had survived the blast, shielded by Jonathan's own body. "You could have run. You could have been the Master's greatest weapon." Jonathan's lips moved, but no sound came out. He looked up at the moon, his vision fading. He had saved the children. He had broken the unbreakable demon. but as the Kikuchi swarmed the ruins to bag the remains and catalog the losses, it was clear that Jonathan Joestar's light had gone out in a world that wasn't ready to see the sun. The silence that followed the detonation of the Infinite Overdrive was not the peaceful quiet of a Victorian countryside. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum. The Butterfly Mansion's recovery wing was no longer a structure. It was a blackened ribcage of cedar and wisteria, smoking under a moon that suddenly seemed dim and distant. In the center of the crater, the air shimmered with the ghost of a golden heat, the last vibrations of the Joestar soul still rippling through the dust. Giyu Tomioka sat on his knees, his mismatched haori shredded, his face coated in the gray ash of the ink demons and the skin of an upper moon. He looked at Jonathan Joestar, or what was left of him. The giant's body was a sculpture of scorched muscle and broken bone, his heart having literally burned itself out to provide the fuel for that final, impossible sunrise. There was no pulse, there was no breath. But as the Kikuchi swarmed the ruins, they didn't move with the reverence of mourners. They moved with the frantic, predatory energy of scavengers. "Quickly, the blood!" a lead researcher from the Corps' surgical division shouted, pushing past a weeping Aoi Kanzaki. "Collect the samples from the floorboards before the Hamon dissipates. We need the marrow. If there is any residual cellular activity, we must preserve it for the forge." Giyu watched, a cold, hollow horror rising in his chest, as the cleaners began to scrape the charred remains of Jonathan's blood into glass vials. They didn't look at the wounded slayers Jonathan had died to protect. They didn't look at Tanjiro, who was howling in grief, his forehead pressed against the dirt. They looked at the asset. They were harvesting the sun. "Get away from him," Giyu whispered, his voice low and jagged. "Tomioka-san, stand back," the researcher snapped, not even looking up. "The master's orders are absolute. We cannot let this unique biological frequency go to waste. If we can replicate the respiratory rhythm of the Joestar, the mortality rate of the Hashira will drop by 60%. This is a corporate necessity." Giyu's hand drifted to his sword, but a shadow fell over him. Shinobu Kocho stood there, her butterfly haori torn, her eyes fixed on the vials being filled with Jonathan's essence. She looked at the wounded children who were being shoved aside by the Kikuchi to make room for the equipment. "Is this what you wanted, Shinobu?" Giyu asked, his voice trembling with a rare, dangerous emotion. "The sun in a bottle?" Shinobu didn't smile. The mask had finally shattered, leaving behind a woman who looked ancient and exhausted. She looked at the Luck and Pluck sword, which lay near Jonathan's hand, still glowing with a faint, dying amber light. "It's what we are, Giyu," she whispered. "We are a machine that eats heroes and spits out steel." Jonathan was just too big for the furnace. She walked over to the sword and picked it up. The blade hummed in her hand, a residual vibration of pluck that made her fingers sting. He didn't die for the core, he died for the cogs. And the machine will never forgive him for that. The next morning, the official report was released to the lower ranks of the Demon Slayer Corps. It was a masterpiece of corporate spin. Jonathan Joestar was branded a martyr of the sun, a legendary warrior whose hidden breathing style was a gift to the Ubuyashiki family. His death was used as a recruitment tool, a way to justify a new, more grueling training regimen designed to unlock the ripple in the next generation of fodder. His sacrifice wasn't a tragedy, it was a PR win. But deep in the woods, far from the sterile reports and the high-security labs, Tanjiro Kamado stood by a small, unmarked stone marker. He wasn't practicing the water breathing. He wasn't practicing the dance of the fire god. He was breathing. It was a slow, deep, rhythmic cadence, a heartbeat that mirrored the one he had heard in the mansion's ruins. His lungs ached, his blood felt like it was simmering, and his hands began to tingle with a faint, golden warmth. It wasn't the sun breathing of his ancestors, it was something different, something human. "A gentleman never turns his back," Tanjiro whispered to the wind, his eyes burning with a resolve that the Hashira would never understand. "I won't let them turn you into a weapon, Mr. Joestar. I'll make sure they remember you were a man." In the Infinity Castle, Muzan Kibutsuji sat on his throne of shifting wood. His eyes narrowed as he stared at a single drop of Jonathan's blood, contained in a crystal sphere. He could feel it. The rhythm was still there, even in death. It was a taunt, a promise that no matter how many strings he pulled, no matter how many families he broke, the sun would always find a way to rise. Muzan crushed the sphere in his hand, the glass cutting into his palm. Some things, the Demon King hissed, simply refused to stay broken. The war continued. The core grew more efficient, more clinical, and more ruthless. The Hashira became faster, their blades infused with the Joestar catalyst, extracted from the ruins. The system didn't change, it simply upgraded. But in the dark corners of the wards, among the collateral damage and the forgotten Mizunoto, a new rhythm was spreading. A gentleman's rhythm, a fire that didn't need a forge. The sun had set on Jonathan Joestar, but the heat remained in the earth. And as long as one heart remembered the meaning of a gentleman's code, the corporate gods of the night would never truly be safe. Conclusion: Jonathan Joestar's arrival in the world of Demon Slayer didn't bring about a clean victory or a happy ending. It brought a collision of absolute morality and systemic cynicism. By defeating Akaza and sacrificing himself for the low-value slayers, Jonathan proved that true heroism cannot be quantified by a board of directors or contained within a corporate hierarchy. He died as he lived, not as a weapon, but as a man who chose to bleed so that others might breathe. The Demon Slayer Corps, much like Vought International, immediately sought to commodify his sacrifice, turning his life's work into a catalyst for their own cold efficiency. They harvested his blood and marketed his memory, but they could not replicate the soul that made the ripple possible. While the system remains as brutal and uncompromising as ever, Jonathan's legacy lives on in Tanjiro, and the survivors who saw the sun without a mask. The Taisho era remains a meat grinder, and Muzan still looms in the shadows, but the fundamental rhythm of the world has been altered. The sun has a new, defiant heartbeat, and the gentleman's code has become the ultimate resistance.